Hello there. For those of you that have watched this before, you may remember I did a series on the Klingons versus the Romulans. Now I had a request for Cardassians versus Romulans. So while I'm waiting to restart the series on the Soon family, because that was popular, this seems like a good way to fill the time. Now obviously I've already covered the Romulans, so this series won't be as much featuring them. So we're going to do mostly breakdowns of Cardassian forces, Cardassian personnel, capabilities and culture over just a few episodes. And while I'm on that, the Soon family series will be continuing once Star Trek Picard Season 3 has concluded, which as of the filming of this episode it has not, which by the way, so good, just so good. Anyway, getting off topic. This episode, as you might have been able to tell from the title, is going to be on one of the premier vessels, if not the premier vessel of the Cardassian Union, the Galor class destroyer. Before we get started on this iconic vessel of the Cardassian Empire, please like, share, subscribe, comment down below, and if you really do like the content on this channel, hit the bell notification icon, because that is the real subscribe button and it's the only way to really stay up to date with all the uploads. With that said, let's get into the Cardassian Galor class destroyer. First thing to point out when I'm calling this thing a destroyer, that is actually a Starfleet classification of this vessel. The Cardassians themselves actually described this vessel as a cruiser, with other powers going as far as calling it a warship, others calling it sort of high-speed assault vessel. That was in the Mirror Universe though. These ships generally are given different descriptions by others, but we'll use the Cardassian descriptive, I think, and we'll call them a cruiser to be nice. Although again, from a Federation point of view, these things are not exactly equal to what they consider to be a cruiser. For instance, although this series isn't about Starfleet versus the Cardassians, it's known that a Nebula class or a Galaxy class vessel was superior to multiple Cardassian Galor class vessels stacked against it. This is due to the inferiority of the technology, but let's get into what that technology actually is. In terms of basic overview, the ship's basic hull configuration has a sort of golden bronze coloured hull with a crescent moon forward section with a bridge crescent moon section sort of planted on top, with what looks like a forward deflector array but actually doubles additionally as a weapons port, because destroyer. The rear of the vessel has a long elongated spine to a sort of claw at the rear. Now the exact function of this claw is not known, but is believed to have something to do with docking procedures of the vessel put at certain Cardassian outposts. It also should be noted that the general silhouette of this ship is vaguely similar to the Cardassian Empire symbol. This aesthetic decision is not lost on an observer and is a very deliberate choice by the Cardassians to make their vessel reminiscent of their own species' emblem. It'd be a bit like Starfleet building a ship to be kind of arrowhead shaped, which when you look at a vessel like the Equinox or the Prometheus, you can kind of see that. Off topic again. The ship, although is no match for these larger vessels, is known to be able to give a Miranda class or other smaller vessels a run for their money. Perhaps not an Intrepid or ultra-modern starship, but certainly some of the older vessels that were floating around in the fleet couldn't really completely outgun this ship. In terms of firepower, again in a general overview sense, these ships have similar features to other races. Typically they are armed with phasers, but have been known to carry disruptors as well. They are armed usually with photon torpedoes, but it's not unheard of for them to carry plasma torpedoes, as well as other warp-capable long-range ballistic missile systems, such as the Cardassian Dreadnought, and similar such platforms. It's not unusual for these ships to have the facilities on board to manufacture, store, and deploy biogenetic and even radiological weapons. The ship is defended by standard type shielding, and there are known to be at least 3 sub-variants of the Galor class, the Type 1, the Type 2 and the Type 3, with the Type 3 being considered the most powerful, probably meaning it's the most modern update of the original design, which we can assume was the Type 1. How long these ships have been in service for is unknown, but they were certainly in service during the Federation Cardassian border wars during the 2350s and 60s. They are warp capable up to a maximum speed of approximately warp 8, so they are substantially slower than their Federation counterparts, and they're also not as well armed or as powerfully armed. They do have replicators and transporters on board, but are known to have slower control interfaces, less powerful systems, less powerful shields, less advanced computers. Basically, they're years behind. One of the notable features that Starfleet, and we can also assume maybe the Romulans have over them, is that they can read their transponder codes, but the Cardassians can't read theirs. So at long range, even though you can't scan it, you know it's there because it's sending out a beacon. Starfleet could read that beacon and know that the Cardassian ship was a freighter or a warship or whatever. But the Cardassians couldn't do the same back. They just knew maybe there was a Federation ship out there, but they didn't know whether it was a freighter or an Excelsior class or some behemoth like a Galaxy class. They simply didn't know. They'd have to sort of take a little more chances, and their inability to outrun their enemy was a problem. These ships were effective at guarding the Cardassians' borders, dealing with pests like the Maquis and other general enemies of the Cardassian Empire, but were considered less sophisticated and less powerful than most other races' capital ships. That said, they were no joke of a vessel, and the Cardassians had a lot of them and were building them up to and after even the Dominion War. To lay out a few little ground rules to this series, this is going to culminate in who would win in a straight up sort of bloodbath between those two powers, the Romulans and the Cardassians. This is going to only include Cardassian ships and tech up to the Dominion War, but not including it. During the Dominion War, the Cardassians gained access to both Dominion resources and technology as well as those of the Breen, and that would give them an edge over the Romulans that I don't think is fair in a straight analysis. So this will be the Cardassians at the height of their power in the 2360s and the Romulans at the height of their power, again, pre-Dominion War era of the 2360s. What do the two powers have to field? Although we don't know how many of these ships the Cardassians actually have, we can assume the number is comfortably in the hundreds, if not thousands, of this particular class of starship. It was the most ubiquitous and most widespread across the entire Cardassian Empire, and they used it for pretty much everything. They were used by all the different Cardassian orders, which we'll get to in a later video as we overview their military, and they were generally considered the mainstay of the Cardassian fleet, although not the most powerful vessel. Each ship of the class had a crew of approximately 600 personnel and was, according to some sources, 371 meters in length, although I do believe there was some variation in that depending on the exact class of Galor class. In other words, which type was it? Type 1, Type 2, Type 3. I believe the Type 3 was bigger, but I don't have the exact stats for that, as the Cardassians are not big on sharing their military secrets, so we don't quite have that. But either way, they had a lot of these bloody things, and they were relatively powerful. How do they initially stack up, though, just as a preliminary prelude to the sort of score, or sort of the not scoring? We're not going to score this. How do they stack up against the mainstay vessel of the Romulans? The mainstay vessel of the Romulan Navy at this time, in the say mid 2360s, say 2365, was the Diderotix class warbird. This ship was over 1,000 meters in length. It was armed with multiple disruptor arrays, alternative weapons such as photon torpedoes, and likely other weapon systems. It also carried cloaking technology, so it had stealth on its side, something the Cardassians lacked. It had substantially stronger shields, stronger hull, more advanced weapons, and was faster. A Romulan Diderotix class was considered a match for, say, 1.5 Galaxy-class ships in terms of scaling. So 2 Galaxy-class vessels stood a good chance of destroying a single Diderotix-class warbird, but in a one-on-one fight, the warbird had every advantage. Now scale that back again to a single Galaxy-class starship like the USS Yamato or the USS Enterprise. Either one of these ships, any of these vessels, could outgun several Cardassian ships. So, if we say 3 Cardassian ships for every 1 Galaxy class, which seems to be about how the Cardassians generally operate, but it takes, let's be rounding up and make it 2 Galor class vessels, that would mean to comfortably outmaneuver and outfight a Romulan warbird, you're going to need 6. Scale it back a little bit, probably going to be able to get away with 5 because I am upscaling that a little bit. And also you have to factor in the tactical advantage of having numerically superior force. If used smartly, maybe the Cardassians could get away with taking on a warbird with 4 Galaxy-class ships if they knew what they were doing. And they used it tactically, because obviously 4 ships are going to divide the Romulans' fire. They're not going to be able to concentrate it. If they use swooping tactics, so they go in, they pull out, they go in, they pull out, they'll be able to outmaneuver the much larger and more cumbersome warbird. So let's be generous and say that 4 of these ships would be needed to equal a Romulan warbird. 5 are going to destroy it in a general every day. But that's a sort of getting ahead of ourselves moment. It's just an interesting thought analysis. Let me find out what you say in the comments below. That sentence was meant to start a little differently, but you know what I meant. Put it in the comments. Where do you think these ships will stack up? Just how many of these, almost going to call them cannon fodder ships, would you be sending against a single Romulan warbird? But bear in mind, before anyone starts jumping to the comments and saying, oh, definitely the Romulans would win, remember the Cardassians had a lot of these ships. And there are other variables in this war, not to mention other classes of vessels, the sheer span of space between them. All these things need to be considered. Where's the battle going to take place? Who's going to win? What's the objectives of the war? The basic objective is going to be forcing the other side to surrender, say. Absolute destruction and conquest? No. Let's not do that. But let's say they both want to annihilate each other to the point of one side surrenders to the other. So that's where the series is going to go. That's the ground rules laid out. Let's quickly get back to the analysis of the actual Galor class, shall we? As I said, this vessel also had transporters and other systems. They were not a weak or easy vessel to push around. Even though I say they weren't generally a match for most of the other Alpha Quadrant's main power vessels, this was due to the Cardassians' lack of resources and their generally inferior levels of technology, something they made up for with clever tactics. And the Cardassians are clever fighters. Often people who were fighting them would often note that they were fighting warp shadows and they were being led into traps and minefields by the Cardassian ships, leading them into believing, because they were no match one-on-one, that the Cardassians had been easy to defeat. The Cardassians are smart at war, and they're also vicious and tend to not take very many prisoners. These ships were not weak. In standard armament form, one of these ships was only armed with 4 phaser arrays and a single disruptor. Torpedoes may even have been an afterthought for some of these ships, so in a very, very basic stock form, they were not a heavily armed ship. But they were still effective, and the Cardassians could build a lot of them. By keeping these ships lean, they gained tactical versatility, which in and of itself is a surprisingly useful tactic. It's not always best to have the biggest, meanest, most powerful ship on the block. Sometimes it's best to have squadrons of smaller, nippier, can handle themselves but aren't necessarily one-on-one a match. And we've seen this quite often with Klingon vessels. Cardassian ships were known to be able to easily take on Klingon birds of prey without much stress, because the bird of prey was a tactically inferior vessel. Again, the Klingons had to use swarm tactics to take on a single Galor class. We saw just one of these vessels being attacked by 2 or 3 Klingon birds of prey, and it, although it wasn't winning, it had held its own. So again, that proportional number seems to be a sort of upscaling thing, similar to with the Galor class versus the Romulan warbird. Each individual warship of this class is commanded by a Cardassian gull. A gull is the Cardassian equivalent of a captain. They serve the exact same function, it's just a different name, so there's not really much need of an explanation there. As I said, there were 600 personnel on board who made up medical personnel, soldiers, engineers, general ships operations officers, and other things like pilots and other technical staff aboard this ship. Quite a large complement of crew for such a small vessel, but that's actually in keeping with the sort of universe's general rules about these things. If you go back 100 years in Starfleet vessels really packed them in. They had a lot of people on board them because systems were more complicated, they required more maintenance, and it just required a larger number of people for the shift patterns. The Cardassians, again, we can assume, same sort of thing. All 600 of those personnel, we have to think they're not awake all at the same time. Even if they've only got 2 shift patterns, a day and a night team, that's 300 of them in bed, 300 of them awake operating the ship. You can imagine the vessel can probably be operated by half that number if needed, so the ship can probably be effectively operated and manned and run effectively by about 150 to 200 personnel on board. No 2 of these vessels are exactly the same, but they're also similar enough that they are lumped into the classes, again with only 3 sort of subclasses with very little variation that I know of between any of the 2. But again, the Cardassians do like to keep their secrets. So that is a general breakdown of the Galor class destroyer, or Galor class cruiser, as I did say at the beginning of this video I would call it. rather generously maybe, but all the same, from a Cardassian point of view, it was a cruiser. We remember, as militaries evolve, so what you call a cruiser one decade, the following decade, the very same ship could be reclassified as some kind of escort. Starfleet, and likely the Romulans, viewed these ships more as an escort destroyer than an actual cruiser, because they simply didn't meet the specifications or tactical capabilities of what they considered to be a cruiser. But these are all very subjective points anyway. We, again, looking to history, looking at Royal Navy history, something I've studied, Royal Navy vessels of the late 19th century into the early 20th century, they went from being mainstay ships of the line to being reclassified as escorts and cruisers and basically discount warships, because they were no longer a match for the newer ships that were coming out after them, particularly once they got Dreadnought. And we can compare perhaps the Keldon class to Dreadnought, as it's an upgunned version of what they already had. That episode, of course, is coming soon. So, we're now at the end of this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell notification icon, because that is the real subscribe button, as I've said before, if you want to stay up to date. More episodes in this series will be coming, along with a few others scattered in, because I have got other episodes planned. I just wanted to make a head start on this one, all in a lead up to finally finishing off the Soon series, once I can do Data and Lore, as I can't do them yet because they were both in. I could probably do Lore now, but I want to make absolutely certain, because, you know, there's still episodes of Star Trek Picard left while I'm filming this. That said, you're at the end of this episode. If you enjoyed it, I thank you for watching, and bye-bye. I'd just like to say a thank you to everyone for watching that video. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoy making these. If you did enjoy it, please consider giving a like, share, and a subscribe, and maybe checking out the other videos on the screen right now, and in the description box below there are links to my other social media accounts.